Thanks for joining us. We are the Long Only Podcast. I'm Doug.
I'm Gerry.
Gerry, how are we doing today?
Doing well. Nice little bounce in the portfolio the last few days. That's always fun.
Yeah, looks like we're going to hit a new recent high. We'll see how long that lasts, but
Well,
things are
yeah, I
looking
think a
better.
high, the last passing, we're going through the high of like August of 2023, maybe 22, July of
Something like that.
23. I don't remember.
So, yep.
Anywho, here we are.
It's where we are now. All we can say, who knows what's going to happen, but all we can say is where we are now, which is nice. As I've said, there's no marketing like bull marketing. So,
I like that. I have not heard you say that.
you haven't heard me say that? No, that's my favorite kind of
No.
marketing, Gerry. Bull marketing.
I like bull marketing.
It does itself
It's a bull market.
for now. And let's talk about something. We'll step back from the markets, and well, I think we should comment on this broadly. We talked about render last week, but broadly, crypto winter is over, Gerry. And
Yeah. New highs in Bitcoin and all kinds of crazy things.
Gerry, do you have any concerns that this is hype? I mean, a lot of these. I'm not a Bitcoin or a crypto expert by any stretch, but I'm seeing coins around that are really doing very, very well that I thought were practical jokes and were dead. Now it turns out they were practical jokes, but they're definitely not dead. Does the hype around crypto concern you?
Well, I mean, any hype is always concerning, but I mean, this has been called a hype for, where are we now? 15 years into this, and and a lot have gone away. I think maybe we're starting to see the real use cases show up. I only follow things that are what I would consider to be valid platforms, the Ethereums, the Solanas, the things of that nature. And I do think Bitcoin has some validity. I do think long term it's more problematic than some who are fans of crypto, and I am a fan of crypto. I'm a fan of blockchain and the uses that it brings to the table, and distributed computing in general, which is not necessarily anything new, but when combined with blockchain, has some really interesting characteristics associated with it. This whole AI thing that's hype, but there's also, I think there's also valid uses there as well. And it's actually not something that's new. It's just now we're getting ever faster. We've talked about this, I know, ever faster speeds in processing that are bringing to light use cases that maybe hadn't been thought about in previous iterations of using computing to solve complex mathematical equations, for lack of a better explanation.
I do think,
I don't. When you say it's a hype, there's always hype in anything that's showing success, that is seeing success. But it's just, like .com, we've kind of, maybe is there possibly another shakeout of some, and again, maybe of some that I'm not paying attention to that are truly just complete nonsense. But I think a whole lot of,
those are still out there. Yes.
Yeah, but I think a lot of those have gone away too. So maybe there's going to be yet another shakeout, if you will. But I think the basic idea is now, some of these solid projects have been around for a while. And, like I said, Bitcoin goes 15 years now. I'm not sold on Bitcoin as an ultimate, by any means, as a replacement yet completely for fiat, because I think there's, as we've discussed, scalability issues. And that is super important if it's, and just the stability. It's kind of like the lack of stability, if you will. Now, maybe it ultimately does get to a point where its stability is such that you're not seeing these wild, crazy, insane swings. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, if you put Bitcoin versus the dollar in the last, 15 years, it's been just a drubbing against the dollar, obviously. So based just looking at the price. I don't know, what is it, 60 something now again? So, and I'm not sure, did it actually reach a new all-time high? I said all-time high. I'm not sure
I'm
if
not
it
sure. It's
did.
I
I
haven't
think
looked
it
closely at
did,
it. I mean,
but
drubbing doesn't even do it
I guess
justice. It's like you know, UFC champion Anderson Silva versus Alan Alda in a fist fight. I mean, it's not even close in terms of comparing the Bitcoin to the dollar, or trying to
right.
compare the dollar to the Bitcoin. It's not.
Yeah, and I think we are right about it. We're right touching on its all-time high, which was back in November of 21, which it actually hit twice. It got in these areas back in April of 21 as well. So 21, it had two big runs up, and then ran up in April, got all the way back down to 30 something thousand, then ran all the way back up into the low 60,000s, and that's where we are today. So uh, yeah, it's making an attempt at yet another new high.
And we cannot. I think one of the dangers we might fall in is painting with too broad a brush. I'm not saying, largely speaking, crypto is going away, but there is still, number one, there are still a lot of meme coins who are getting drug along with this. There's that. So not all the use cases are created equal. And number two, anytime you're seeing these kind of wild moves, even if the ultimate trend is upward and to the right, there are going to be a lot of people who get caught up and the investment and the underlying asset has some utility. There are going to be a lot of people who get caught up in it and end up, as distance mileage may vary, as I say, and get caught up in the speculation, and they fall by the wayside. And that's going to be, I say that to myself as much as anyone. Bitcoin has been a nice investment for people recently, but I think if it could be killed, it already would be dead. But there is still a lot of dross that's along there.
Yeah, no, I don't. I mean, I think it's not going away, or at least the phenomenon is not. Bitcoin's not going away. The phenomenon is not going away. The real use cases are clearly not going away. So, I think all those fiat people. Now that said, fiat currencies still dwarf the size of Bitcoin, even at whatever it's at right now, $1.2 trillion in market cap. I mean, it's still way below the value of dollars that are out there. So it's got a long way to go, but I'm not sure that it is, and I don't think it needs to be it. In other words, I think there can be many different and there will be many different cryptocurrencies, if you will, that are used as a medium of exchange eventually, that end up solving the problems that Bitcoin doesn't solve. Bitcoin was created for the purpose of being an alternative to the debased currencies, fiat currencies, that we've watched for 100 years do nothing but get crushed by politicians and policymakers that have done this to us, basically. And so more power to it. That's why the policymakers hate it for the most part.
Well, and you touched on it earlier, but Bitcoin is still a long way away from being something that's used in everyday transactions, number one. But number two, I've always said a lot of the value, I shouldn't say I've always said this, but once I got over my initial skepticism with Bitcoin and now been more accepting of it, I would say that a lot of the value in Bitcoin is that it's not about what it is, it's about what it isn't. And that is an inflatable US dollar. It is self-limiting.
That's a great point.
That in of itself, the fact that it's self-limiting gives it utility. So.
Right.
Or I should say utility value. So
yeah. And so I think it's proving its point.
Yeah. It could lose 95% of its value and still perform better than the dollar over the last 15 years, I'm betting. So.
That's probably right. Well, maybe not 95%. But I mean, when it came down, it wasn't even close to that. I mean, as far as how much it came down.
Well, I think that since the dollar has gone backwards, I think it could be right. I have to think about the math. I'm not good at public math, but I've only got a math major. But since the dollar is as far backwards the dollar goes, I think a lot of hyperbolic statements about Bitcoin versus the dollar could be true. Let's just say
Well,
that.
certainly from the beginning of Bitcoin, it could go. You're right. It could go down 95%, and compared to dollar, it would still be a considerable
Yep.
benefit. But anyway,
Well,
it's
let's
not
switch.
going away. But more importantly, the whole blockchain crypto ecosystem is not going away, and it's finding more and more use cases.
I think, yes, dismissing it as a fad, do at your own peril.
Yes.
You may not like it, but do at your own peril. Let's switch gears to what we're going to talk about today, spend the next 10 or 15 minutes discussing, and that is the idea of expertise. And Gerry and I didn't flesh this out completely before the show, but based on our pre-show banter, I think we might largely agree. Gerry, in a nutshell, expertise. What do you think?
Overrated.
There you go. I could have finished the sentence for you.
Well, that was the one thing I said, so we cheated a little bit when you brought it up. That was the one word I think I used, and we said, "Okay, let's go with it."
Did you think I
That's
would
how much
agree?
show prep we do.
When I said let's talk about expertise, and you said it's overrated, did you think I would agree?
Knowing you, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm certainly not relying on
to the
expertise.
extent I know you. Do I really know you, Doug?
I think you do.
I know you better than I did yesterday. Yeah, I think you. So not surprising that. So is that it? We agree. We'll move on, or do we need to elaborate? Are you going to elaborate?
I think we
How
need
do
to
you want to
elaborate.
elaborate?
Gerry, when it comes to reading, I love to read. Love it, love it, love it. But I comfortably nest in this region of reading called middlebrow nonfiction. And in the lowbrow nonfiction, I'm always not as much as I used to be, but I'm a sucker for a lot of these pop psychology books. I call them smart books for dumb people or dumb books for smart people. I don't read them as much anymore, but I picked one up in a moment of weakness. And I'm not going to say it was by a best-selling author. I never read any of his stuff, but someone who specializes in corporate/organizational psychology and things like that. And the book had me thinking about this idea of expertise because it's about basically checking our assumptions and also not thinking we're the experts of things. But which is good. But when I get done with the book, I don't know if the book will have spent enough time blasting the experts. Because it's easy to blast the common man, the person who learns enough to be dangerous and becomes an armchair quarterback and basically makes that sort of that amateur fallacy of thinking they know more than they do. But we're seeing this a lot at the more experienced level as smart people are reaching across their domains to pretend they're experts on things they aren't. And also that people are trying to apply expertise to these very dynamic, technical issues. Obviously we're seeing things like expertise in coding and expertise in technical proficiency and things like that, very hard skills and true sciences. We're seeing that. We're seeing in true applications of science. We're seeing expertise at an all-time high. But when it comes to these dynamic prudential areas, I think that's the area where expertise is really, really letting us down.
Agreed. I'm not disagreeing with anything that you're saying there. I guess, I mean, it's kind of funny because it seems like a day doesn't go by now that we don't get another story of some organization doing a mea culpa quietly, if you will, but still doing a mea culpa on what they said about COVID, for example.
Yes.
I don't remember which organization it was. Maybe it was like World Health or whatever. Well, yeah, so maybe the COVID came from a Chinese lab. But even worse than that, I don't really care as much. I probably should, but I don't care as much of where it came from as much as what the response was from these so-called experts. If we didn't prove that experts are, and I want to be careful here because as we wrote, and I will bring this up forever and ever, not because we were an expert, we just used some common sense. As we wrote in March of 2020, that we got to be careful that the cure isn't worse than the disease. There were experts that were sounding the alarm, and then guess what happened? They got crushed. They got canceled. Call it what you want. They were thrown into the loony bin by the media and the so-called, those that were in a position of being of wielding power as experts. Okay, so those people were experts and were sounding the alarm, and nobody was listening to them. Well, at least the proper people weren't listening to them, or the people that had the reins of power weren't listening to them. So, I mean, I think these last few years with COVID and even more, maybe even more so, well, I don't know, or at least just equally the wake of COVID and what was done in order to try and offset the effects of COVID has just been a disaster. So, yeah, it's it's not hard to be skeptical of expertise, quote unquote, these days. And I have to be careful because in our business, I often say, jack of trades, master of none, because we kind of have to know a little bit about everything, just enough to be dangerous. I mean, we're not trying to be, we're not experts, for example, on semiconductors, but we know a lot about semiconductors enough, in our view, to be able to, make investment decisions about them. And I truly believe, and this was something that my, mentor and father-in-law, Dick Taylor, always used to say is, you need to understand enough of things just to be able to make a sound investment decision. If you're not required to know how all the science works behind it. You want to find people that do, so you can ask the proper questions to determine whether or not it's a sound investment. So we get exposed to a lot of things, and sometimes maybe we can sound smart, but we really aren't. More than anything, and I think where expertise is really overemphasized is in our business. And I'll give credit to someone I criticize a lot, Warren Buffett, who I don't remember exactly how he said it, but it's something that far more important in investing is your stomach, not your brain. I think that's very true. More than anything in investing, you need a disciplined process, and you need to stick to that discipline at periods in time when it looks like you just don't know what you're doing. I mean, and we're human, and when we see things go sideways, we question ourselves. But it's that where a true professional comes in or steps up in our business is, no, this is how we do it. We're not deviating from this discipline. We're not turning tail and running in another direction because it's gotten tough. It's gotten, the heat in the kitchen is burning us. And I can't tell you how many times that's been absolutely the way to approach things. And it will always be the way to approach things, in my opinion, from an investment management standpoint. I have said so many times, this isn't rocket science, what we do. It just takes a level of tenacity and discipline that most don't have, which is why we have a job. This isn't something that others can't do, not in any way, shape, or form. And I will also add, there are more than one way to skin the cat, to use an overused term or phrase, that our way is not the only way. It's just our way is going to be our way, and we're not going to change. As soon as you start trying to deviate in what you do and how you do it, then you've got trouble. And the problem is, in our industry, we see that all the time. Even the typical mutual fund, which I would argue, which is run by a professional money manager who should have a discipline, and probably and maybe does, likely does. But the problem is that the average mutual fund tenure of the manager is like 4.2 years or something. I think that's largely a sign of that most of the money is in the hands of a very few number of mutual fund companies. We're a little tiny speck with our mutual fund, our core growth fund, a tiny speck on the beach of the financial services world. Whereas we're not talking about an 80-20 rule in our business. It's like 98-2 or 99-1. The 1 or 2% of the actual firms manage most of the money. And I think that's part of the reason why they have this slew of mutual funds on their menu, and the managers are changing all the time. And so the poor shareholder doesn't ever get that long a period of time of a disciplined process. Not all of them are like that by any means. In fact, if you're searching for a mutual fund, find ones that have long tenured managers. That's probably the most important thing. It does, and so that's an aspect of, is the expertise what makes you successful? And I think the answer is not really. It's the discipline. It's stick to itiveness. It's having that gut be like, ironclad in periods where it's like, oh my gosh, this is just not working right now. And for sure, we had a couple of years here where there's just been really difficult after having 5 years of being on the cloud nine with our portfolio strategy. That's going to happen. And clients and shareholders of funds will lose patience and leave. That's part of the process. We try and keep that from happening. And lo and behold, almost all the time, and all the time, every time in my career, that's been the wrong thing for shareholders or clients to do, but it happens. Find a decent manager, stick with it through thick and thin. And as long as something hasn't happened, like you sense that they've changed their strategy, worst thing that could ever happen. And that is just a recipe for disaster.
Well, especially changing the strategy from a time of weakness. It's one thing
absolutely.
when things are good, and to take a look at, okay, we had a big drop, things went down, now we're back, we're caught up, let's rethink. I'm not advocating that for us or anything like that, but I'm saying, but it's so much worse to change it when things are bad than when things are calm or good. You don't make good decisions during that time. And I would say that a lot of the value, I mean, you bring up a lot of good points. A lot of the value prop that we have to offer, sure, it's our methodology and things like that. But the mere fact that your commitment to sticking to a plan, the fact that we have a team, and the fact that we have an amount of professional pride, and that yes, we don't just we know enough, have enough historical memory as a firm to know that you just don't gain much by panicking when things aren't going well, and just serving those firewalls on the client's worst demons is in and of themselves. Those things provide value. Then obviously you throw in the fact that we have enough experience to be pretty good at picking good companies and things like that. But these bare minimums do, in terms of protecting the investor from making bad decisions, in and of themselves can provide a value.
Definitely. And so expertise overrated, but we don't want to throw it out the window. There's places where expertise matters, but it's interesting. I brought it back to money management. It can apply to a lot of things. I think one of the problems that you have, though, is in our business is somewhat unique in that we really do have to know, like I said, jack of all trades, kind of have to know a little bit about a lot of things, almost everything. That is kind of unique. I mean, there's not a lot of professions, I think, that are like that. It's kind of why I was attracted to it, and I like it, love it, want to do it forever, and probably never retire. You'll be wheeling me out from the desk. And that's not because I'm necessarily want to be a workaholic either. It's just I enjoy doing it. It's an extremely intellectually challenging business, while at the same time requiring a level of discipline and fortitude in the gut, that intestinal fortitude, that is unlike anything I've come across. So, but there are certainly areas where you're going to have brain surgery. I mean, you sure as heck want to have an expert working on your brain. Things like that I don't want to underscore where expertise is important, but let's just put it this way. I think there's a whole lot more folks out there claiming to be experts that aren't, or that, and to the extent that they're claiming it, they're overrated, or the extent that they're being called experts, it's overrated.
Well, and speaking to what you talked about with the brain surgery, obviously there is a big epidemic, no pun intended, regarding people thinking they're doctors, and there's this populist revolt against the medical profession, and then all the experts are talking about the history of things like vaccines and of the value that doctors bring to the game, and that you wouldn't do brain surgery on yourself. Okay, given, I get those things, but I would ask the experts, don't befoul yourself by by doing the thing you're doing with the COVID response, whereas you insisted you were right, you then you then shut down dissent, and now you're admitting you're wrong quietly and not really apologizing for it. So it's one thing to armchair quarterback, but when you have people who in the moment were telling you you were wrong in the moment, and you not only didn't listen to them, which is, we all make mistakes, fog of war, I get it. You didn't listen to them, but you demonized them.
Yeah.
And that's going to
So
be an issue. And then when you're throwing in things like obvious issues with gender that we're dealing with these days, where the medical profession is just selling out on basic axioms of when life begins, when it ends, what it means to be a man and woman. Well, obviously, even though you are probably qualified to do brain surgery because you have the technical ability, and your judgment has just been clouded because you've applied a moral filter to these very obvious issues and applied it incorrectly. I'm not going to trust you on brain surgery if you can't get the basic stuff right, even if you can do the brain surgery. So,
yeah, I think that's a great point, and it's true, but I think part of what happened is we hear this term a lot lately, politicization. I mean, I think that's what we were experiencing with this COVID thing, whether we like it or not. And the history books, I think, will certainly, assuming they, Lord knows we've had a lot of revisionist history in recent decades, but I think they'll get it right, because it ultimately has become so obvious, and they will. I don't think they will be able to not. So it depends on who's writing them, I guess, but they won't be able to ignore the fact that this has happened the way it has, and yeah, it's been. I mean, I don't think the healthcare profession has been in a more precarious position in its history, given the way it responded and acted during that period of time and allowed it to be politicized. But I think, a lot of it is just, we've been saying this forever. Goes back to the question of our time. This is what happens when you have a government that is just too big and too intrusive and has too much power. And, subsidiarity is thrown out the window. So I think there are signs that people are waking up to this. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm just hopeful, but and foolishly hopeful. But I think it's becoming more evident to maybe some folks that don't normally pay as close attention that we were really lied to in this thing, and this was a complete fiasco, and this was wrong, I mean that's just from our perspective. Then you go to some of these circumstances where you have kids that have had serious emotional issues over being locked up the way they were, and even as serious as just to look at what's happened to the suicide rate amongst young people. It's heart-wrenching, and it didn't need to happen. So I'm sorry to say that we were right in March of 2020, and that it would cost a lot more lives than this disease would ever take. And then to come to find how they were lying about what the deaths from the disease were. I mean, it's a dark stain on the medical profession and the healthcare profession, and I don't know how you get that back, but anytime soon. But it's why you're having this sort of cottage industry of alternatives come up. And that is I don't want to say it's dangerous.
it can be.
It can be. It's concerning. It's concerning because you don't want to be so anti-establishment, if you will, to where you're turning away the obvious cure for something just because it happens to come from pharma, for example, traditional pharma. I mean, I'd like to think that there are still good people that are trying to come up with medicines that will save people's lives. Now, part of the reason why, again, that we're having problems with pharma is too in bed with government. There should be some sort of rule. I hate even talking or saying things.
Government needs a rule to protect us from government.
Well, the way the FDA is a disaster with respect to the coziness with which the industry and the regulators are working with each other. I mean, there needs to be some sort of moratorium on your ability to be able to bounce from one side of the equation to the other, which there isn't right now. And I think that's one of the big problems you have. You've got this, you're in the farm industry, then next day you're on the regulatory side, then you're back on the farm end. I mean, it's just not good. So again, I don't like regulation, but there are certain things sensibly that you need to have some level of, if there's anything that you want to have some government involvement in. That's probably it. Doing some sort of analysis of, the efficacy and the safetiness of drugs, but we're not doing that right now. For one thing, it takes too darn long because of all the regulatory bureaucratic nonsense, and then just getting basic stuff right. Like, okay, let's eliminate some of the conflicts of interest that can inherently come up when you allow people to bounce back and forth from industry to the regulatory side. There's some simple things that I think can be fixed, and if Congress is doing its job, those are the kinds of things it's focused on, not the nonsense that most of the time they are focused on. Not trying to now. There's a crisis, if you will, that has a reason why there's a reason why government should be involved in helping to solve that crisis. There's a problem with that, as opposed to most things like the regulatory regimes that have come in the wake of 0809, came in the wake of .com. We've talked about them ad nauseum. That maybe even with good intentions, we're trying to solve problems for the average person. It just made it worse, or created the law of unintended consequences stepped in and created things that issues that no they hadn't thought about. So it's easy to sit here playing armchair quarterback, but on the other hand, I don't think we did when we were vocal about what we thought on the COVID thing. So that wasn't armchair quarterbacking. That was in the thick of it. That was in the thick of the game and early in the game. And I wish more people were saying that, but people were in positions of power. Obviously, it wasn't us. So anyway,
quick exit question.
Yeah.
Maybe you have an answer, maybe you don't. What, setting aside COVID or interest rates, what is the greatest failure of the so-called experts that sticks out in your mind?
Well, I mean, I kind of think what we just experienced, what we were just talking about, is I've said, and I will continue to say, I think this will go down in world history as being one of the greatest frauds ever perpetrated on mankind.
But setting aside COVID.
Oh, you said set aside COVID.
COVID.
Gosh, I don't have an answer to that one off the top of my head, Doug. Rephrase that? What's the greatest example of
the so-called
failure of the so-called experts?
Yeah, I'm gonna say probably either. And again, I probably would have been wrong about these in the moment. I know I was for some of them, but maybe Vietnam War, the war in Iraq, Carroll's decision to throw in the Super Bowl against the Patriots. So I don't know, things like that. So
there's so many. I mean, I think you'd have to take topic by topic. If you talk about war and peace, I would go back to World War I. I think, and I don't know if one of the problems we have in government, and you look at throughout history, these people that were making these decisions weren't the brightest bulbs on the bush. I'm sorry, but World War I was just an absolute disaster, and all in the name of democracy, which is, as Aristotle told us, would always lead to tyranny. And sure enough, so I think that 100 and some odd million people killed in the 20th century from the various isms. And I think there was a lot that led to World War I, but there were decisions made in our country to get us involved in that I think said it was a mess. And even our history books weren't revised enough to not point out that the Treaty of Versailles and all that stuff was really bad, with reparations, with what it did to Germany, and then led to Adolf Hitler. So gosh, we could do 500 podcasts on that topic. But you ask, since you threw a war and peace into the equation, I would throw that era, the crumbling of the final monarchy in Europe resulted in, all in the name of democracy, resulted in a complete horror that I think, no doubt, we're still suffering from today.
All right. So the ways to find us: taylorfrigon.com. Learn more about our fund, our investments, our mutual fund, and
got a lot more heady today. Doug.
We did. Not talking about just the market mechanics. What more can you say? Things are going well right now. Hopefully it lasts. We'll see.
We'll see.
And also, TaylorFrigon.invest on Instagram and our YouTube channel. Hopefully you're watching here. And you want emails. longonly@taylorfrigon.com. Until next week, I'm Doug.
I'm Gerry.
Thanks for joining us on the Long Only podcast.
Bye now.
Bye.